The last few times Pixar made us wait countless years for a sequel, we got Finding Dory, The Incredibles 2, and now Inside Out 2. And these were sequels that audiences weren't overly thrilled by. So, will Pixar's third recent attempt at giving audiences a long-awaited sequel work out better for them? Well, let's dig in and find out. Let the battle commence. The story for Inside Out 1 asks a very interesting question. If you could just turn off your sadness, wouldn't that make your life so much better? Wouldn't that make everyone's life better? And it's a genuine question, and this film tells a whole story about it. Sadness is kind of the indirect villain of this film, until you find out that she isn't. The movie really has no villains, it just has mismanagement. Joy is trying to control and put a positive spin on all of Riley's negative emotions, and has caused Riley to bottle up all her sadness and emotionally lash out and break down. And in the earlier parts of the film, Joy becomes so possessive over Riley's positive state of mind that she unknowingly kind of becomes a dictator, controlling not only what Riley can feel, but what she's allowed to feel. Except she just does it with some good intentions and a big old smile. And she is doing it because she thinks it's exactly what Riley needs to be happy. And watching the different emotions interact with each other and constantly alternate between emotions with Riley, you just can't take your eyes off it. And it's funny because on its own, this is just generic family stuff. A kid moving away from home and having to readjust to life, lashing out. How many times have we seen that before? But combining it with the thought process behind the kid's emotions and the internal dismantling of all her positive personality traits makes this generic character development seem so much more layered, emotional, and impactful with her growing decline. And watching the rest of the emotions try to keep it together is so fun and even tense to watch, and they inject it with the perfect amount of humor. And the comedy is really funny in this. And the story for Inside Out 2 is about Riley hitting puberty, and as well as delving into all the teenage behaviors and tropes that you would expect, it also decides to intriguingly tackle anxiety, which is a topic not just limited to teenagers, but adults too. Although this movie purely focuses on the anxieties a teenager would face, which makes sense. And the jokes that came with this were really funny. I loved how the emotions barely touched the control panel and Riley's reactions were so extreme. There was even a moment shortly after where the emotions tried to gently prod at the control panel with a stick. Now the stories of both of these movies are split into 3 parts. For Inside Out 1, we have the emotions inside the control room, the emotions on their way back to the control room, and Riley's life. In Inside Out 2, it's also split into 3 parts. The new emotions inside the control room, the main emotions on their way back to the control room, and Riley's life. And strangely, I only liked 2 of these parts, and I didn't like the other. We'll start with the ones I liked. I liked watching Anxiety and her attempts to reshape Riley's personality. That was both fun and nerve-wracking to watch, as she's constantly making all the wrong and most destructive decisions to Riley's life. And Maya Hawke, who voices Anxiety, does a fantastic job. She really was the standout performance in this film, and I really enjoyed this section of the story, especially their introduction. The other section I liked was watching Riley cope with life as a teenager, and her decisions to leave behind the people and things in her normal life, including her morals and identity, to make way for her new social life in high school. And watching her try to force herself to change whilst also trying to cling on to some parts of herself was also intriguing to watch, and it very nicely tied in to what Anxiety and her crew were doing. Now, it wasn't all sunshine and rainbows here. There were some not so good parts during this section. The stakes for Riley here just weren't as high as they were in the first film, and although I was watching her go through this life adjustment in high school, I wasn't really invested. I was more interested in seeing how Anxiety will be proved wrong than I was in what would come of Riley's life. In the first movie, Riley is running away from home. In the second film, she's afraid that she won't get in with the cool kids. And although that is something teenagers go through, it just didn't lend itself to a dramatic and emotional storyline like the first film did. I think if the movie leaned into her emotions about her friends leaving the school and her, then there would be more weight to her trying to fit in with the new crowd. Because as is, they talk about it very shortly, and then it's not really brought up again until the very end. So I wish they would have delved into that part of her anxiety more, the feeling of being alone. And I feel like it wasn't emphasized enough. So although I like this setup, the emotional and personal stakes for Riley did not feel as strong in the second film. And that is a shame because all the pieces were there, they just needed to hone in on it more. As is, I think it wasn't as well balanced as it could have been. And her anxiety attack at the end was good, but it just didn't land anywhere near as hard as watching her break at the end of the first film. So I liked the section with Riley, but I think it fell short from being perfect like it was in the first film. And you've probably noticed, that leaves us with the only section I straight up didn't like, which is the journey back to the control room with our main characters. Now, I like how in the first movie it was joy and sadness making their way back, and in the sequel, it's all the characters making their way back. This is something that the majority of us wanted to see, as they were split up throughout most of the first film. So the setup was great, but there was just something off about their writing and even their performances. They felt oddly out of character at quite a few parts, and their journey back, to me, felt too similar to their journey back in the first film, to the point that they copy it beat for beat at times. There is one scene that is not only identical to the first film, but was positioned in the exact same place as well. Joy gives up and sees all the thought balls of Riley and starts to cry, except in the first movie, it was a genuinely great and sad moment. But in the second movie, it feels like a checkbox scene. You know, like some studio exec said, it worked great in the first film, so let's do it again in the second movie, and it just didn't deliver the same impact. And there was another scene earlier on where Joy got angry and then broke down in front of her friends, and it just felt too early. Pixar would usually wait a long time to drop the sad scene on us, but I felt that the new people at Pixar dropped it way too prematurely, and it just felt out of place. And the way the movie decided to make Joy recover from it was with a quick pep talk, which felt like it came right out of a first draft. In fact, if I'm being honest, the writing during these parts felt like it came out of a straight-to-video Disney sequel. You know, those sequels to fantastic Disney films. Some of the writing in here reminded me of those. Now, I really liked all the scenes where anxiety, embarrassment, and wee-wee were coming in and essentially wrecking Riley's life without knowing it. Envy, I completely forgot she was there. And anxiety in particular had a very sinister dark side to her. One scene especially when she captures sadness. Everyone in the theater broke out laughing, including me, because it seemed like such a nice moment at first, and I felt like there was value with seeing how these three could affect a teenager's life, and watching the rest of the characters do a fetch quest just didn't grab me. And the overall situation didn't seem as hopeless or dire as it did in the first film either, and that's because with each bad step that Riley took, a treasured and personal part of herself was completely destroyed, and you felt it each and every time, and it carried such a weight and impact, and you don't have that kind of heavy stakes and tension in this film. So if the movie succeeded in giving us an emotional journey with our main emotions like it did in the first film, then maybe I would be much more into it. But as it stands, it wasn't. So I was just left feeling like I was watching a cheaper sequel during these parts of the film. And not to mention the second movie's rather bizarre pacing. There was a beautiful rhythm to the pacing of the first movie. It was paced like the classic Disney movies when Disney and Pixar were at the top of their game. But Inside Out 2 is paced more like the modern Disney and Pixar films. And it feels too quick and not as intimate as the first movie's pacing. And there are certain scenes that are not given the time to breathe. Now that said, the last 10 minutes of the film really took its time and slowed down to the point that you could feel the intimacy of every frame, just like you could throughout the first film. And I wish the new director for the second film would have done more of this throughout the movie, because it was really well done. But he didn't, and instead, most of the film felt like it was running a bit too fast for my liking. Also, funnily, who else got reminded of Wonder Woman 1984 with joy and anxiety in the climax? Now the first movie didn't make me cry, but it got close. Heck, it even got closer when I watched it again just recently. The second movie didn't make me cry at all. It just didn't feel as impactful and heartfelt. And like I said, the emotional scenes with our main characters felt like it was just trying to duplicate what it already did in the first film, which says a lot about the current state of Disney and Pixar, that they're trying to replicate what came so naturally to them before, but they just can't seem to do it. And it just continues to prove that they have in fact lost themselves. They are not the same studio they were before, and it's like they don't even know how they did it. Unlike Riley's internal struggle in the first film, the internal struggle in the second movie just felt more predictable and generic. In the first Inside Out, I knew that things were gonna get resolved in the end, but I didn't know how. In the second movie, it gets resolved exactly as you would expect. If you've watched any teenager get their shit together by the end of a movie, that's exactly how Riley gets hers together too. And believe it or not, it shouldn't be this way, but I think admitting your sadness is far harder to do than what Riley ends up doing in the second movie. And watching Joy realize that there is value in sadness, both figuratively and literally, was a very good journey for her too. Without sadness, you're just living in denial and not accepting or even dealing with the reality of the situation, which is exactly what Joy and Riley do throughout the entire movie, until they realize that they were wrong. And this results in the best scene of the film. And scenes like this really show what makes Pixar so special. And I found there to be a deeper meaning behind this, and it's something that people of all ages can relate to. The teenager stuff was decent too, and definitely had a good lesson, but it's a lesson that we have learned from countless other movies. The first movie took advantage of telling an internal story and really used this concept to peel back the layers of joy and sadness. And I don't think you could tell this story as effectively without it. But in Inside Out 2, the ultimate message that is being delivered is the same message I've seen from countless other teenager crisis movies, and it didn't hit me in the feels in that special way that only Pixar can. By traditional Pixar standards, the quality of the storytelling in Inside Out 2 is 50% theatrical movie and 50% Disney Channel. The story itself and the setup is good, but there was just something about the execution and the way a lot of these supposedly heavy scenes were written that just felt like they were meant to be written as episodes for a TV show rather than a super emotional and high quality Pixar movie. And this seems to be an issue that Pixar has been running into a lot over the past several years. The first movie felt like it was written as a full-on high quality movie, back when Pixar was in their prime, and the second movie, at best, feels like that only a fraction of the time. So I appreciate what Inside Out 2 is trying to do, I just don't think the development, the self-destruction, and the payoff hit its landing as well as it did in the first film. And whereas I really enjoyed all three perspectives in the first Inside Out, I only enjoyed two in the sequel. And even the two didn't feel like they were up to the quality of execution as the Pixar of old. And although I really enjoyed the new characters and found them to be so fun to watch in Inside Out 2, including some other funny characters that show up in a giant vault, I felt that the characters were better utilized and developed in the first movie. And plus it had Bing Bong, a character that tricks you into thinking he is going to be a generic comic relief for kids, ends up saving Riley by sacrificing himself, and made everyone watching cry in the process. Except for me, I just felt really bad. But yeah, there's no denying, I'm dead inside. I mean, what Pixar did with Bing Bong was nothing short of amazing, and affected everyone.
Everyone, okay?
So the movie with the superior story and characters is Inside Out 1. Back in the day when Disney and Pixar were constantly making hit after hit, I kinda just took for granted when they made a great movie. But after seeing the abhorrent amounts of uninspired crap they have been making over the last several years, going back to Inside Out 1 really made me appreciate it even more than I did before. This really showed me how on point and full of passion Disney was for emotional and heartfelt storytelling. And rewatching this movie just made me sad to see how far the company has fallen.
Okay, not what I had in mind.
And Inside Out 2, although better than the last few years of garbage they've been making, just doesn't match up to the quality storytelling of the first movie. On the plus side, this is a movie that you cannot get a controversy out of. This is a clean family movie that everyone worldwide, of all ages and cultural upbringings, can watch and enjoy. And no one can claim that Disney are attempting an agenda or are trying to be woke. There were opportunities where they could have gone down that route, but you can tell that they consciously stayed well away from going there, because they know that they cannot afford to put families off anymore. And well, it's a good thing that this movie did well at the box office, because it will just prove to them that they should continue making non-agenda driven entertainment, and for me, that is a good start for them to get back on the right track. And I just really hope they manage to get back to that fantastic Pixar writing and quality, with the heartfelt emotional beats that they used to pull off so well. So although this movie does not fix Disney, it does show promise for their animation divisions, as it seems things are starting to make a turn back to the right direction. Well, maybe not. And with a fantastic box office performance, you can bet that Disney want to get another win like this. So you know what that means. More sequels. I guess in some ways, Disney will never learn their lesson. At the beginning of this video, I told you that Inside Out asks the question, if you could just turn off your sadness, wouldn't that make your life so much better? Wouldn't that make everyone's life better? And by the end, the movie made its case, that sadness is important. The case that Inside Out 2 makes is that it's okay not to be good enough and that you don't need to be perfect. And that's a very good lesson. Ironic that it's coming from Disney of all people, but it's still a good lesson. But the payoff and the way it all came together felt very superficial. Now, there are some people who swear by Inside Out 2 and say that it perfectly depicts their anxiety in high school. And for those people, I'm glad it worked. But unfortunately, it didn't really work for me. But that's supposed to be the magic of Pixar. Even if you can't relate to something, like running away from home, they find a way to make you feel for the character that does, and they usually leave you in tears too. And I just didn't find that in Inside Out 2. The stuff that I liked consistently was from Anxiety. Everything else, although it had the ingredients, the execution was just meh to me, especially when compared to the execution of the first film. When you combine all the elements together, I honestly came out of the theater ready to give this movie a 5 out of 10. But upon reflection, I have softened on the movie a little, and I do remember it more fondly now than when I came out of it. So because of that, my rating for the film has slightly increased. It's time for the scores. Inside Out 1 gets a 9 out of 10, and Inside Out 2 gets a slightly above average 6. I always thought that Inside Out was made for a sequel, and Disney and Pixar decided to wait 9 years to give us a story that, in large part, just feels like a rehash of the first film. It's another road trip movie where Joy and crew have to travel through Riley's mind, except we have more characters, and no one died this time. Personally, I downright loved the first movie. I liked it when I was younger, but I love it now as an adult, and the second movie, it was just okay. Also, Bill Hader doesn't voice Scared in Inside Out 2 and has been recast with comedian Tony Hale, and you can really tell none of the nuance that Bill Hader brought to the character is present here, and the replacement voice they get sounds so generic and is just one note the entire film. They also recast the voice for Disgust, and I honestly didn't really notice much of a difference with her. The intended effect is still there with her voice. Also, the score was vastly superior in the first movie, sporting some really beautiful music, and the sequel for some reason didn't use the Inside Out theme very often. It only used it like twice, once in the opening and once in the climax. Although I think it's better than their last several movies, Disney is not out of the doghouse yet, and they have a lot of work to do if they plan to win audiences back. Thanks everyone for watching. If you're new, consider subscribing and giving the video a like, and feel free to watch my previous versus battle of Godzilla x Kong and Godzilla vs Kong. Also, there's my Patreon and YouTube memberships where you can join and watch exclusive content including trailer reactions, game shows, Let's Watch episodes, and so much more. And a big thanks to everyone who already supports me over there. Links are in the description if you want to join the fun too. Thanks everyone for watching, and I will see all of you next time. Take care.